Hello, everybody. Welcome to April 2020 edition of the Anthony Peake Consciousness Hour. April the 12th is a very important day. Well, it's a very important day for me because it's my birthday.
Happy birthday!
Thank you. And it's also one of the kind of weird days in history as well, in that April the 11th, 1954, which was the day before I was born, is regularly being cited as being the most boring day in history. And I can only assume it's because it was in preparation for my birth the next day. Also on April the 12th, 1954 was the day that rock and roll was born, because that was the day that Bill Haley and the Comets went in and recorded Rock Around the Clock. So I'm literally the age of rock and roll. So I'm literally a child of rock and roll. But one of the things that really amused me was a couple of days ago, quite coincidentally, because of the subject we're going to be talking about today, I discovered that April the 12th, 1974 was the day that Keith Hearn first did a series of experiments with lucid dreaming. And that April the 12th since then has been Lucid Dreaming Day. Now, again, it's one of the subjects we're going to be talking about today. So it is really wonderfully synchronistic, or as I'd call it, synchronidipitous, that our guest today is the very wonderful Jade Shaw. Now, I've known Jade for quite a few years now. I'm a great admirer of her work. And I was delighted a couple of years ago when Jade invited me to be involved in a fascinating documentary she did called Inside Out, which we'll touch and discuss as well. But I've never known a great deal about Jade. She's a lady of mystery. I know that she comes from the north of England like I do, but she has this air of mystery about her. And it was I was delighted to actually get some background information about her for the bio. So I'll tell you a little bit about Jade from the bio details, but it's really quite fascinating. And I can probably have a whole interview just based upon Jade's life, really, I think. But this is the bio that we'll tell you a little better. Jade is an out-of-body experience OBE researcher, speaker and teacher. After a life-changing OBE in 2014, she left a 12-year career as a choreographer to research the phenomena for her MSc in Transpersonal Psychology. She created a documentary called Inside Out, featuring experts such as New York best-selling author Eben Alexander, the lead Monroe Institute trainer William Buhlman, and the former NASA physicist Tom Campbell. She is the Astral Projection consultant for the new Netflix series Behind Her Eyes, and has been featured on national magazines Women's Health, Spirit and Destiny. She has spoke at diverse venues throughout the UK, from London's legendary spiritual organisation Alternatives to private members clubs Soho House and Ace Hotel, and Europe's largest mind, body and spirit festival. Workshops have been delivered throughout the UK, Croatia, Hungary, Austria, Amsterdam and Prague. She lived in a Tibetan Buddhist temple for 5 years, receives guidance from Master Lama Yeshe Rinpoche, has trained at the Mindfulness Association and the renewed Monroe Institute. She's a member of the Scientific and Medical Network. Wow, that is really quite fascinating. So Jade, welcome to the Anthony Peake Consciousness Hour.
Well, thank you for having me. We're going to get into some juicy stuff, so I'm very excited.
Great. Well, without further ado, I mean, before we go into the whole interest about out-of-body experiences, I'm really interested to just talk for a few minutes about your experience in the Tibetan Buddhist temple for 5 years. That must have been absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, no, it was, and it was, I think actually from living there is where I got a lot of my knowledge and insight about the Tibetan Buddhist view of out-of-body experiences as well. So I'm very grateful for that. In terms of living there, I had access to 2 shrine rooms. So you'd think I'd be in there every day doing meditation, but it's that thing when it's on your doorstep, you don't do it as much as you probably should. And so now I've left, I'm like, oh gosh, I should have probably done a lot more meditation than I might have. So kind of regret not doing as much, but it was great. I got access to a lot of teachers, a lot of workshops, had access to the yoga room. So when I was doing my dance stuff, I could do some choreography in there. So yeah, it was a fascinating place to live in a really nice community.
Intriguing. Maybe we'll touch base upon that later on. Okay, so many of the people listening and watching here will probably be aware of what the out-of-body experience is. But really, just to go into some background for those who have not experienced it and don't know about it, what do we mean when we use the term the out-of-body experience?
Yeah, great question. So personally for me, I take a Western psychological view of the out-of-body experience with a bit of a mindfulness approach, and I kind of draw on Tibetan Buddhism and some shamanic traditions such as the Mexican Toltec. So from my experience and my research, an out-of-body experience is when our self-awareness seems to expand or shift beyond the physical body. And so there's usually two defining aspects. The first is a sense of separation from the body, which often feels very visceral. And then the second is our self-awareness or self-perception, let's say, exists in a separate place from the physical body entirely. Usually, we don't have any sense of connection to the physical body, and we appear to be floating out and away from it. So much so, we can actually turn around and look back at the physical body lying there. And then usually there's a sense of traveling to different places, different locations. There might be some encounters with entity or beings. And then there's a sense of coming back to the body and a bit of a crash landing, if you like, some people report. So this sense of returning to the physical body. And so I align with the group of people that it is not just a dream. I think they're very interconnected, but it's not just a dream, not just a lucid dream, which is when we wake up in our dream and we are aware and awake that we're dreaming. Not a shamanic journey where the shaman takes us into a co-created visualization, usually through a drum or dance, and usually takes us into a forest or cave or a river and helps to co-create that with words. And also not remote viewing, which is when we send our perception to somewhere and in our mind we get a visualization of a place at a distance, and we can write down what's happening and what we are seeing from afar. However, this is where it gets tricky. Because an out-of-body experience takes place in an altered state, usually or most often on the cusp of sleep, when we're falling asleep and waking up, if we get into an altered state through remote viewing, a shamanic journey, or lucid dreaming, there is the potential to then springboard from that experience into a full-on out-of-body experience, if that makes sense.
It very much does. So how did, we'll come back a little bit more to the detail, but how, in your introduction, you mentioned about your own amazing experience in terms of out-of-body experiences. So can you tell us a little bit about how you got into it yourself, how you as a choreographer, a dancer and everything else, what happened to make you suddenly be so intrigued by this phenomenon?
Yes, I had a life-changing out-of-body experience in 2014, but it actually started back when I was a kid. So when I was a kid, I would be very scared at night times. I would have these experiences that the bed was shifting back and forth very aggressively, almost 2 foot, like someone had grabbed the end and was shifting it back and forth. I'd hear lots of different sounds. I would get flashes of light. And I was really scared of these experiences, and I didn't know what to make of them. So much so, I actually slept with the bedroom light on until I was 18 in my parents' house. So I can sleep in absolute blinding whiteness, which is, I don't know if that's a skill that may come in handy in the future. So yeah, but then what I realized was when I got to about the age of 10, I got really fed up. I told my mum about these experiences. She was thinking of taking me to see a child psychologist. But then what I realized was if I slowed my breathing down at the point of which these vibrations and these sensations were happening, it would slowly bring the experience to a stop. And so it did, and I didn't have them for a long time. And fast forward to the future, I'm in my 30s, I run my own dance company, and I go to pick up a book on a shelf in a bookstore, and it was like one of those moments from Harry Potter where it's like a dusty old magical bookstore, and I opened up a book called Journeys Out of the Body by Robert Monroe, and he was talking about all the sensations I'd experienced as a child. So I thought, oh my God, if this happened to me as a child, and this is potentially the vibrational state, the precursor to having an out-of-body experience, could I bring one on now? Would I be able to get back to this and actually self-induce an out-of-body experience? So that's what I thought I'll do. So I practiced some of the techniques for a month and nothing was happening. Tried a bit more, nothing was happening. So you know what I thought? it's probably just a lucid dream, because I'd been practicing lucid dreaming for about 15 years and documented around about 200. So I thought, it's probably just a lucid dream. They look very similar on paper. It's probably just that. So I just gave up. And then once I'd let that go, obviously, the intention of having one, a week later, I woke up in bed, I went to go to the loo, came back, and I dropped straight into the vibrational state. So I was lying in bed, my eyes were open, but possibly was in an altered state, felt this energy flurrying through my body, the vibrations coming on. So I thought, okay, stay calm, do the exit technique. So I did an exit technique called the rollout, which is when we shift and roll to the side. It's quite well known in the community. And I rolled out of my physical body, and I actually rolled into my husband, who was lying next to me. And I was able to sense in a very physical way, even though I weren't physical at the time, his body next to me. And coming out felt a little bit like, you know, when Velcro peels away from your shoes or a coat, kind of like if you were to pick a toffee off a sofa, that kind of chewy feeling. That's what it felt like when I came away from my body. And then I found myself standing in my room, and I thought, okay, stay calm. Don't get too overexcited or too fearful. And as soon as I'd thought to stand, I was standing. So it was a thought responsive environment. There wasn't a traveling to the standing. I was already standing. And then I thought, okay, I should do something. I should really, hone this experience for as long as possible. And so I thought, right, go out the window, which is a habitual trait from my out-of-body experience practice. So I go out the window and I drop down into the street, and there was this hyper-realistic detail, and I was able to see and really sense the dew on the grass from the park to my right. That was about 6 meters away, like I had extraordinary vision. I was also able to look up to the sun, and I saw the sunbeams coming down, because it was early morning, coming down from the sky, and I was able to kind of like zoom into the light of the sunbeam. So it's kind of like I had these spidey senses, if that makes sense. But then I looked down at my physical body. When I looked down, I didn't have a physical body. I just had this translucent, shimmering energy form, a little bit like a mirage. And when I lifted my hand up, my arm kind of flurried, a little bit like when light leaves a trail behind. And if it made a sound, it would be a bit like... And I do remember thinking at that time, oh my God, this is so cool. But then I thought, okay, let's use this experience. Let's not waste it. So I thought, I need to verify this. So I decided to travel down the street, and I traveled down a few different streets, and I came to a house on a corner of a crossroads. On the left-hand side, there was this green arch-shaped door with paint stripping off it, and there was number 18. And I thought, okay, I can remember my way here, and I'll remember this house is very distinctive, number 18. But what do I do now? I'm still in the experience. So I thought, okay, I'm going to say this. So I made a command, an intention with a motivation behind it. So I said, with my energy arms out, if you like, looking up to the sky, I yelled, "Take me to Nirvana," as loud as I could. From then on, the experience was out of my control. It was like some sort of unseen force had picked me up, and I was floating up, 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 and I got above the trees. But before I got to the clouds, I remember distinctly, I passed through what was some sort of thin film or veil, but it was like static electricity hanging in the sky. And when I passed through, I lost any kind of shape or form. There was no energy body anymore. I was just now a floating point of awareness. There was no sense of distance. There was no up, down, left, right, no sense of space. And I was in this huge, massive tunnel that filled the entirety of my perception. And there was a white light at the end. And something was pulling me from the core, if I had a core, it was from the core towards this light, kind of like I was mesmerized by my being towards this light, like a gravitational pull of a magnet. And as I'm floating through, I see lots of different images. Images is the wrong word, kind of beings or consciousnesses or spirits, however you want to call it, in the tunnel in different places. And they were completely unaware that I was there and that I was witnessing this. They seemed to be in their own world, repeating actions, actually. I got halfway towards the light, and then what happened? Absolutely filled with fear. What the heck is going to happen when I reach the end of this tunnel? What happened when I felt fear? Back in my physical body. So I wake up in my physical body, I sit up with a ball, I'm looking at my arms like this. I have static electricity all over my arms, which I think is interesting. And then my husband wakes up beside me, and he knows that something's happened because he's a dream practitioner. And he says, "What's happened? What's happened?" So I look at him, I go, "I think I've just had an out-of-body experience." He goes, "Oh, okay, well done." Rolls over, goes back to sleep. Typical. Yep. But I'd had this big experience, and I was like, "No, you don't understand." Like, fully came out of my body and had this big experience. But then the same day, I chose to go and find the house on the corner. So I managed to find my way back through the streets, found the house on the corner, and it was the same number. Not the same door and the exact same shape of house, but the same number, number 18. And I hadn't been down that street before, so it wasn't necessarily memory, perhaps, that I was drawing on. So this blew my mind. I also tapped away furiously at the computer, and of course, the tunnel of light comes up in many out-of-body experiences, and same with the near-death experiences. And it just really made me want to explore my experiences as a child, and also what had happened to me now as an adult, which is why I decided to leave my own company, which was such a difficult decision because at the time we'd spent 3 years building this new project that had just received funding from a national governing body to roll out across the country. And I had to turn around and say, "No, thank you," because I couldn't go on doing the same thing that I was doing, knowing what I knew now. So that's what made me enroll onto my master's degree, Transpersonal Psychology, and also why I chose to study it as a research topic for my dissertation, which was on the transformative effects of out-of-body experiences. So after we've had one, how does it then actually impact our life? That's it in a nutshell.
Wow. I mean, there's so many issues there that triggered in my mind in terms after my writings on the subject of the out-of-body experience and things. And one of the things that I'm particularly intrigued in, a previous guest of this show is Dr. Penny Satori. And Penny recently wrote a book on the transformative experiences of the near-death experience. And clearly you're arguing as well as the transformative experience in terms of the out-of-the-body experience as well. And of course, we then look at the parallels of the tunnel of light and everything else as well. And we might come back into that. But I'm very interested in your opinions of the experience itself. And particularly, I'm intrigued by your description of the entities you saw that first time. Have you subsequently encountered entities, and have you interfaced with entities in these altered states of consciousness?
Yeah, well, it depends what you mean by entity, but I've definitely had quite a few meetings with different beings, or what seem to be external beings, because obviously it could also be a thought form personified from my own mind. But yeah, I've had several different types of encounters, some more telepathic communication style, and others a little bit more face-to-face when I've been out, for sure.
Okay. And have you come to any conclusions about the fascinating role of because I've never heard this before, the idea of actually moving through a kind of like a barrier that you were describing as you were going up? Have you experienced that again?
Yeah, and usually, actually, that's an interesting question. Not where there's nothing at all. So I moved through and passed through this thin film of static that seemed to be in the sky. So I just moved from one space to another where there didn't seem to be anything there. Whereas when it's happened before and I've shifted from one reality to another, let's just say objective reality, my bedroom, to seemingly a different dimensional realm or plane of space, it's usually been when there's a symbolic of passing through. So if I pass through a wall, or if I go through a door, or I sink down through the floor, if there is a barrier in the way, it seems to be that then can trigger you to go to a different place, it seems. And I talk about a lot of this in my workshops, because people often think you just come out in your room, usually in objective reality, it's not always, and you're just in your bedroom. But actually, there's different types of environments we can exit into, and it's not always our bedroom. I'll give you an example. So I come out of my physical body, and I usually go through the window or through the wall. That's my go-to habit. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to go through the floor and just see what happens. So I did something called the corkscrew technique, which is actually an exit technique from the body. But I thought, I wonder what would happen if I did it down through the floor, which is kind of like this spiraling of your awareness and your form. So I'm standing in my bedroom, turning like this in my energy body, and I'm going through the floor. And so my feet are coming down through the ceiling of the room underneath. Now at this point, I'm in the Buddhist center. So underneath my room is the offices. So it's the reception. So I naturally assume, oh, I'm going to be dropping down into the reception. But of course, we know these can be transitional, kind of liminal spaces that we pass through into different places. So I go through, and almost my eyes get through. Just as my eyes are passing through the roof, a man beneath me screams like he's seen something, a very shrill scream. He's very scared. And I briefly glance the room before he freaks me out, and I go back to my body. So as soon as I hear him scream, and he's obviously seen me, I've just gone back to my body because I've freaked out that someone has been able to see me. But I managed to glance the room. It wasn't the same space as the Buddhist center, but I didn't manage to glance the man. He must have been to the side or the back of my forward perception. So that's an example of shifting spaces.
Jade, I have a question for you, because I find something very fascinating, because thought forms are things, and they're very, very powerful. And when you were saying that there was like this static type of barrier, and then you go into the next realm, that's very fascinating, because this place called planet Earth is full of thought forms of holding down people's perception of reality, meaning the 3D. I mean, they do this from the moment that you're a child. So you cannot see what you need to see, because let's be honest, we only see a particular aspect of the light spectrum, and there's a whole bunch of stuff around that. Children are magnificent and alchemists, because in animals, they see everything. So, you know, when you go through the system of quote unquote the 3D paradigm of man-made thought structures, it creates this barrier, so you can't see what's behind it. So I find that fascinating that you said that after you left, you got past that mental barrier, if you will, so you can go into the next realm. That's fascinating. That, to me, that confirms that thought forms are actual things. They're barriers. They're like this, I guess you could say, 3D Akashic record that keeps people locked down in the 3D form. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? I know what I mean to say.
Yeah.
That's fascinating to me.
No, definitely. And I'm really glad you brought it up, actually, because I talk about this so much in my workshops in regards to perception and thought forms. Because, you know, when you were saying then about how we, let me know if I've got this wrong, if our cultural conditioning effectively takes over and it stops us from seeing what then we might be able to see as we maybe once did as children. And we take these into the out-of-body experience. This is why I take a mindfulness approach to the practice, because it helps us to take a step back from our cultural, religious, personal conditioning in order to see clearly the environments and the encounters and the entities that we might be seeing. So as an example, you can have 3 people meet an entity. Let's say it's a glowing being of light. Let's say it's very angelic. One person might interpret that as Jesus, another one might interpret that as the goddess Diana, and another person who's atheist might just interpret that as a loving presence. And so each will come back, and then they'll interpret it through their lens of perception often, and say, this is what happened to me. They've all had the same experience, but yet it's been interpreted differently, and they've made different meanings of it. And then also how that then affects the person. So one person might come back and go, oh my God, I met Jesus, I'm now an enlightened being, come and receive my teachings. Another person might have a spiritual crisis where they're, for example, the atheists, if they've seen this golden being of light that they feel is a true gnosis of like a spiritual knowing, they might go, oh my gosh, all my beliefs that I've had, maybe they aren't true. And that can actually send someone into a spiritual crisis, a little bit like depression or psychosis. And then the other person might go, do you know what? I'm just not going to remember that. It's just seems not to be something for me, and then just get on with their life. So each of the effects of those three experiences, even though they've had the same experience, is very much impacted their life in three different ways based on their perception, very similar to what you were talking about. And I'm very interested in that. It's also why I'm really fascinated by experiences people have that are not in alignment with their belief system, or what they might predict or what they expect to happen. So I find that fascinating.
No, you're on point, and that's a very powerful thing, because I find that this is why science can't get past a certain barrier, because that's a particular mental paradigm of the matrix, and they're so locked into that 3D realm to see the infinite possibilities, even though their theories are projecting the infiniteness of knowledge and knowing. Their mental space locks them into their 3D frame, and they can't get past it. And that's why they can't discover certain things. That's why I love what you and Anthony do, because you got to surrender that identity, and that's very, very hard. You have to transcend that energy, that mental energy. So I just wanted to say I found that to be interesting, that little border of you passing through, because thought forms are things, and it creates this fear of locking people in, and they can't see the whole spectrum. And that's the first thing you have to release in order to see everything.
Exactly. I totally agree.
I think it's one of the major issues, isn't it, at the moment? It's one of the major issues of my work, and with the approach I'm going at the moment, is with my concept of the egregorial. And one of the things, as a trained sociologist myself, I'm always intrigued by something called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, the idea that in some way our language and our perceptions model the way in which we perceive external reality. And this isn't just to do with prejudice and extracting your own worldview on the external world, because there is obviously a symbiotic relationship between what I'm perceiving and what is externally out there. And clearly, I think your point was an excellent one there, that people will interpret the beings they encounter here dependent upon their own cultural norms. This doesn't mean that the beings aren't external to us. It just means how our perceptions work. Now, I know, Jade, that you've been heavily involved in your own areas of research in terms of the out-of-body experience. So can you tell us a little bit about what you have discovered from your own research during your master's degree and everything else as well, that might be of interest to the listeners or the watchers out there as well? Because I'm particularly intrigued with the work you've been doing in terms of transpersonal psychology.
Yeah, so what I did was I was doing a qualitative study on 10 people who had had an out-of-body experience, and they were healthy people. So the reason why I chose healthy people was that most studies are on people that have pathological conditions or illness. So, so I had 10 people, and I was looking at what is the thing that they all experience. So I was looking for what are the commonalities, what are the correlations that they all seem to share, and also then impact their life. So I was particularly looking at what their experience was, and then how it impacted their life, and in what way it impacted their life. And so there was 8 themes that came up. And these are very reflective of near-death experiences. There was a lot of crossover. So one was that it became a catalyst. So they wanted to know more, they wanted to find out more, they went to workshops, they read books, they wanted to know what the hell happened effectively. It became a catalyst, and then that showed up in their life in various forms. For some people, it might have been a change of job. For other people, it might have been a change of spiritual belief, but it became a catalyst in their life. The second one, and this is probably the biggest one, was a decreased fear of death. And this is amazing, because if we can have a decreased fear of death and release death anxiety, that's just going to release a lid of fears within our life. And if we think about now, at the time of the coronavirus, which I'm sorry, but a lot of the panic buying and a lot of fear around it, if we look at what's underneath that, often it's actually death anxiety. So if we can release that, that's going to have a domino effect to other fears in our life. That's going to allow us to kind of rise above them and come forward to fulfill our own potential. So they had a decreased fear of death, mainly through the transcendence of identification with the physical body. So they did not self-identify with their physical form anymore, but they took on a more eternal form. They believed they were a spirit or a soul or a consciousness, but something that would continue after they die. That's amazing. Basically, we can have the effects of a near-death experience without the near-death part. So I think that's fab. And then we had increased inner peace. So a lot of people had interconnectedness experiences. So there was increase in inner peace, a new worldview. This was quite important. So they had the experience, and then their view of their world changed in some form or way. And that was slightly different for everybody. And there's a theory called Honeg's theory, which is that he suggests an out-of-body experience could be a medium for a new emerging self to come forward because of changing circumstances. So I'm just going to come back a little bit. What I found out, which was super cool, is that the OBE came at a point in time that was transitional for the person. So they were at a crossroads in their life. It could have, for some it was an emotion time, for others it wasn't emotional, but it was a transition. And so they were able to gain insight to something that then led to a change or an adaptive skill to their life situation. And that relates to the new life view, because then their view of their world changed in relation to the need for this new emerging self, which is why I'm just going to add on a thing. I think the practice of out-of-body experiences can lead to self-actualization, because it seems to be evoking self-actualization. And then the last few I'll just whiz through. So sense of individuality, a feeling of authenticity, coming away from the herd, not wanting to be kind of like sheeple, but finding our own sense of self, becoming our own, having our own authentic voice and place in the world. And then reevaluated relationships. So there was a loss of some friend groups, and then a gain of other friend groups, brand new ones. So a reevaluation of relationships and some close ones as well. And then affirmed or new spiritual beliefs. So the beliefs that people had, they definitely then believed them, or they gained new ones, as I said earlier, in regards to believing now in some sort of afterlife or continuation of consciousness. So those were their 8 main themes. Couple of cool things. So the main things that affected transformation was the frequency of them, and also, what was it, frequency and the features. So the more features that somebody comes into contact with, the more likely it's going to impact their life. So what I mean by feature is like, they came out of the body, they had that sensation, they then traveled to a certain place, had an encounter with an entity, traveled to a different dimension, then came back. So that's like 4 or 5 features, whereas someone who just comes out of the body momentarily and then goes back in may not have a bigger impact on their life. However, it does depend on the personality of the person, because we had one lady who had had over 100 out-of-body experiences and a gentleman who'd only had 2, but he was just as impacted by his experiences as she was, because it was fresh, it was new, it wasn't familiar to him, whereas she'd got so used to these experiences it had become part of her norm. So she was like, yeah, it does impact my life, but it more or less didn't impact it as much as when it first started. So it seems that familiarity with the OBEs, whether it's a rare event or whether it's a regular occurrence, seems to impact the level and depth of transformation in our lives. Just depend on content sometimes. And then the dominant feelings were either, which I think is a funny paradox, fear or awe. So either we're really filled with fear or really filled with awe. Granted, there's a spectrum of feelings in between this, but these are the 2 dominant ones. But what's super interesting is that with awe, if we can have for example, there was a study on awe, a really big social study by Dasher and Keltner, and they found out that if people have fleeting but rare experiences of awe, it can swiftly change our life in different directions. And related to this is something called the overview effect, which is when astronauts go into space and then they look back at the Earth. And when they do this, their self-identity changes from almost an individual one to one that is encompassing more of the whole. They might experience interconnectedness, a wider sense of perception. Their idea of national boundaries might drop. And I think that when someone has an out-of-body experience, they have something similar. And this is what I've called the outer view effect. So when people look back at their physical body, it's not dissimilar for when astronauts look back at the Earth. But they don't have to look back at their body. It can just be the experience of the OBE itself. So that's pretty cool as well. There's a few more things, but I don't want to hog all the time if you wanted to discuss other things.
No, not at all, because to me, what I find interesting here is your interesting application of Maslow's hierarchy of needs to the out-of-body experience, again, which is very, very interesting. Also applying sort of a lot of Jungian ideals here as well, which is intriguing. And I think that your work is of profound importance here, because it's the first time I've ever thought about the transformative effect of these experiences. I very much studied the experiences, but I've never really thought about what the effect that has on the individual. And I thought you made a very interesting point there about the way in which the experience seems to be somehow timed at the right moment for the individual as well, that there is some kind of a force that's actually developing and helping the person transform into something else. So obviously, from lots of people listening in here, they're going to be absolutely intrigued and fascinated about the out-of-body experience. I also am aware of the fact, having known you for some time now, that you also train people in these experiences. And I'm sure a lot of people must be thinking, wow, 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 I really would like to know the processes by which I can have these experiences. So how do you go about teaching somebody? You've mentioned about the vibrationary state. You've mentioned various other states, the physical and mental states you can get into. Can you explain a little bit about how you train somebody and how somebody could, tonight, for instance, try and see if they could get into an out-of-the-body state? And then it would be really great, because then we could get feedback from people as to how successful they were at doing this. So guys, listen to what Jade has to say and let's try it tonight, and let's just see. After all, it's the 12th of April and this is the Lucid Dreaming Out of Body Day, special day. So please.
Okay. Well, in that case, I'll give a little tip at the end, because I'll explain. So I do like a day workshop or a weekend workshop or a 4-week course, which is online at the moment. And what we do is we look at 3 steps to having an out-of-body experience. The first is bringing on the mind awake, body asleep state. So this is when the body is completely relaxed, but the mind is awake and aware. So we're looking to bring on an altered state of relaxation, but with focus and concentration. Then the second one is attempting to bring on what's known as the vibrational state, which I mentioned earlier in the story, which feels very physically real. And I'll tell a little side story here, because I think this is a really nice way of showing how anyone can experience it, regardless of your belief system. So you mentioned, Anthony, that I was the consultant for the new Netflix, the Beneath Her Eyes, which is coming out in the summer. So I worked with the actors and I did an introductory workshop and presentation with them. And there was one gentleman on it who listened to everything respectively, but more or less said in so many words, he didn't believe it and he didn't believe it was real, which I get, okay, and that's fine. And so it came to the practical element of the workshop, and I took them through some of the techniques, and we did a sharing circle at the end, like we often do. And one of the lead actress actually managed to get her energy head out of her body, which was a great success in your first workshop. So that was great for her. But he kept very silent. And then as we'd finished and everyone was packing away and things, he came up to me and he went, a lightning bolt shot through my body. A lightning bolt went through my body. And he was really quite disturbed about this. He was like, it happened, it hit me. It went right the way through my body. And I was like, okay. I was like, calm down. Well, I didn't say calm down because that's a bit patronizing. I said it's totally fine. This is the vibrational state. It feels very real, very physical, and it is quite shocking if we haven't experienced it before. It's not always this intense, by the way, but for beginners, sometimes it is. And so he'd experienced the vibrational state, even though he didn't particularly believe in it. So these techniques work and the vibrational state is real. So we try to self-induce the vibrational state, and then from there, we do exit techniques to springboard from the vibrational state into an out-of-body experience. And there are various different ways we can go about doing that. So I teach some visualization methods, some breathing techniques. I draw a lot on yoga nidra, mindfulness of dream and sleep, and also meditation. And we look at different people's backgrounds as well, because if you're not strong at visualization, probably won't work for you. A visualization technique wouldn't work. And I'm a kinesthetic person, so I'm a very physical person with my background in dance. So I prefer a lot of the movement-based tactile techniques. So I teach some of those as well. So we learn about these different stages and different techniques to go out, but then we do a lot of theory, because it's important that we know that the entities and also the environments that we can go into, how they might show up in our experiences. So we learn a lot about that. If you want to have a go tonight, kind of does dependent on if you can get yourself into an altered state, the mind body asleep state. But whilst you're falling asleep, and you can practice this every night, I want you to try and just relax and just focus on the imagery or the blackness, whatever might be there behind your eyes. So what we're trying to do here is harness the hypnagogic state without falling asleep. So I always say, as a side effect, you might have more lucid dreams, because a lot of people end up falling asleep consciously and then having a lucid dream, which we know is the wild technique. But we want to hover on the hypnopompic state and just watch what's happening. Now, you might have hypnagogic imagery, colors, fractal patterns, images of faces. You might have visceral sensations in your body. And it's not trying to change those, or try to bring them on, but just holding your focus like you would if you were looking at a candle, or if you were anchoring to the breath, holding your focus on what's happening in your line of perception. So I want you to try and do that tonight, and every night if you can, because what this is doing is it's building your resilience and your strength and your neural pathways in order to hold focus for a long period of time. Because if you can do that, you won't fall asleep. You also will be able to have longer out-of-body experiences, and you will be able to have more because you're able to harness the hypnagogic state. So I want you to try that tonight as a little side thing. And then we can get on to exit techniques and stuff like that.
Excellent. So guys, really do try this, and let's get some feedback on this to find out how people and the experiences you have as well, because it's only through reports that we can understand these altered states of consciousness and the locations that people go. And people like Jade and myself that are researching on this is profoundly important. Now, you've talked about the transformative effect. You've talked about it in a very, very positive way, which is excellent. But are there any risks involved here?
Yes, so there's a risk that one could have a spiritual crisis, which I briefly touched on earlier. So if our psychological scaffolding of our house, our mind, if that gets knocked down, say a brick gets knocked out of the house could come crumbling down. And let's say that brick is a belief or a worldview. It could kind of cause collateral damage to our internal psychology. And then that person could spiral into psychosis, or they could spiral into depression. I do want to say this is very rare, and it's also, it can also happen more to people who already have mental health issues or psychosis, which is why I say that if you have those things, not to do this practice. So it's important we have a very strong sense of self as a psychological anchor, because that could get whittled down or broken, as I just mentioned, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, because Stanislav Grof talks about actually how spiritual crisis can be a tool for then the rebuilding, a bit like the butterfly coming out or the lotus flower coming out to a new self moving forwards. But that can happen, particularly if we have a encounter, and I'm mentioning this because this is probably the most reported when people think of negative experiences, with something that we deem as negative or bad or evil, which I think it was really nice. We talked about perception earlier, because it's not always what we think, which is why I teach the mindfulness aspect of things. I'll give a little example of this. So I talk about doing shadow work in out-of-body experiences, which is where we can come into contact with thought forms manifest from our own mind, which may have split off due to trauma. It's not dissimilar to what in shamanism would be called soul retrieval. And this is where we can have encountered with seemingly beings that are separate from ourselves, but seem very much interconnected with us. And I'll share William Buhlman's experience. It sounds pretty terrifying. I should probably stop sharing it. It might scare people off, but it's a very positive experience he had from this. So he went out of body and he was in a corridor and he heard these footsteps coming up some stairs. At the end of the corridor, he saw this being that had something like sloth arms, human body, and I can't remember if it was a wolf or some sort of fox head, but some sort of crazy animal head. So obviously he sees this and he's like, oh my God, that is so scary. What the heck is going to happen? But he kind of froze to the spot and he just stayed where he was, rather than what I call is touch and go. So if we have one of these encounters and we don't feel ready, we can touch and go, where we touch it with our awareness and we remember it, and then we focus away and we can leave the experience. He didn't do that. He decided to stay there, which is what I call amazing shadow work. He decided to stay there and it walked slowly towards him. And it eventually got to him and it passed through him. And as it passed through him, it dissolved away. And as it dissolved away, I think he said he woke up and he said that he didn't know what that was, but there was something there that needed to be released, come to the surface, or that needed to be what I would call integrated back into his psyche or into his life. He doesn't know what that was, but it was what I would call a shadow aspect, which would be maybe very different from what we might call a being that might seem separate from ourselves. So it's interesting that we need to differentiate and determine what is potentially part of our own mind, what is potentially something separate, because often people think everything in the OBE state is separate, and I don't think that's so, and we're missing an amazing opportunity for some healing to happen there.
Robert Wagner, we had him on the show. I love Robert Wagner. He's one of my favorite dream people. I just love him. He talks about that, and he talks about how there are instances where he's had experiences where he's faced that fear, and it's exactly what you just said. So it's like doing shadow work in the next realm of reality, facing that fear in our perception, what we deem to be something scary, but confronting that. He was saying that once you confront that aspect, that it transforms, it mutates, it synthesizes into something else. So, wow.
Yeah, and also it can just be because Todd Akamesis, who's an astral projection teacher, he often talks about his shared experience with his son, and he saw a shadow in the distance. And again, a lot of people see a shadow and they just associate badness with darkness, which is natural because, as we were saying earlier, it's part of our conditioning. So he sees this shadow and it gets closer and closer and it's coming towards him, and as it kind of fizzles into view, it's his son. So it can just be as simple as something like that as well as a thought form from our own mind. So I think it's important why we practice how we react, which is why the mindfulness is important. To practice how we react to what's going on in the environment, so we don't react from our ego trying to save itself from its own death, which is what it thinks, but that's not true.
Because that's one of the things I'm finding, the deeper I go into this subject matter, the more I'm realizing that rather like there's the concept of duality and non-duality in terms of external reality and internal reality, there is now seemingly a singularity of consciousness and what we perceive. And in many ways, the two things interface with each other in a far more subtle way There is no outside, there is no in here, there is a singularity that we work within. And I'm quite fascinated at the moment, moving along the lines of working with the concept of tulpas, working with a lot of the themes that I discuss in my latest book, the Hidden Universe, because this is intriguing. And the things you've been saying here have really triggered so many ideas in my own mind about this. And all the time we're trying to think, don't get trapped into any kind of pre-programmed way of seeing things. Just accept the phenomenon as how it presents itself. Now, one of the questions that I'd love to ask you here is the entities that people perceive that seem to be external to themselves. What do you think they are? Have you in terms of your experiences, what exactly do you think their role is in all of this? And where are they from? And do they have motivations themselves?
Well, firstly, Annie, I wanted to say thank you for saying what you just said, because I'm really fascinated by this at the moment, and I'm wondering, because naturally the human brain likes to split things. It likes to split things into this, that, black, white, good, bad. But I'm wondering if the thought forms from our own mind and the things we think are separate, could they actually somehow, and maybe we're getting a bit into quantum physics here, both be the same thing or interconnected in a very similar way? So they are both from our mind and both real at the same time. Now, I'm very uneducated to answer the question you've just asked me. It's very much beyond me, but that's what I'm looking at the moment. But I will say, I do think the universe is massive. I mean, you spoke about this before. It's huge. So just statistically, there must be other things in the universe. Just statistically, it's massive. It's huge. If you've ever seen one of those Facebook zooms where you zoom out from the potential universes, there would just statistically be other beings. Now, whether or not that's what we're getting into contact with, I think is very hard to determine. And I've asked a few different teachers this as well. And they come up with lots of different, some are similar, but lots of different answers as well. So I don't think anyone really knows the answer to that. But I think we should all try and experiment and explore with it and just see. In terms of where they come from, I just think it's such a huge question, and we don't even know. Like our model, as we were talking about earlier with science, and particularly scientism, the belief in that science is, held almost like a religion, the dogma that comes with it and everything. So I think even the way we currently think about the universe, that's framed in a certain way, we can't possibly know. I mean, Anthony, we could go into dark matter, and we could go into, string theory and multiple dimensions. We just don't know. So I think all we can do is explore for ourselves, make our own decisions, be very, I was going to say be very educated, but here we go again. As soon as you start to educate yourself and read things, psychological constructions of what things should be like form in your mind. So a bit like the Buddhists say, learn everything you can, then throw it out the window and let it go. But I think we need to take that approach and not be so fearful with our interactions with them, because there is a lot of fear mongering I've particularly noticed online as well. That just isn't helpful, especially for this line of inquiry that you're talking about, Anthony.
I think so. And one of the things that people out there who are listening and watching this will know that Jade and myself were part of now an extended group of researchers that have been almost drawn together by gravitational force almost. It's quite amazing how we are all working together now, and it's like a huge Venn diagram. There's all these areas of people who have expertise, and we're all pulling it together. And we genuinely don't know why. We discuss this quite regularly, don't we, as to why we're all being drawn together at the moment. And we're being drawn together because we have to be. We have to be. And it's one of the things you said earlier on, which I thought was intriguing, the idea of when you have a transformative experience, all your old friendships change because suddenly you find new friendships and new people that share your experiences and share your interests, and you resonate. And I think the more of us, and the more of us we're discussing, and I know that Dia and I have discussed this many times, we have to have some kind of a conference where we get all the guys together in some way. And we really would create something incredibly powerful if we could do that. You know, just have a conference and a discussion, just an ideas generating group. It would be absolutely fascinating. Jade, we're coming towards the end of the hour now. So what I'd like you to do is to give us an opportunity. I'm sure there's going to be an awful lot of people out there going, wow, 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 how do I know more about what Jade is doing? How do I contact her? Everything else as well. You know, so please, please let us know what you're doing, how people can contact you, where the courses are and everything else as well. I know we're in lockdown at the moment, but nevertheless, you know, let's get people involved.
Yeah, I mean, well, you can, all the information's really on my website, www.jadeshaw.com, but I mostly update social media more because I don't know how to work my own website. So if you go into my Facebook or Instagram, which is Jade Shaw Astral Teacher, that will get updated first. But I do have an online course, a 4-week course where we meet once a week on a Sunday, and it's theory and it's practical, and we get homework. So we do homework as well. And then we come together and share our experiences as a group. And this is partnered with the Psychedelic Society. So maybe I could put the link for that on the thread if people are interested. I think we've got about 8 places left on that.
I have to ask you one question before we leave, from artist to artist. I don't know, you fascinate me on many different levels. And I think it's because you're a dancer, you're an artist, and the way that artists perceive reality, even in the 3D, is very different than the scientific mind. So the way that you're merging things together, I'm just fascinated by you. So for some reason, you remind me of Alex Gray. Love him. His energy is fabulous. If you don't know who he is, check him out.
Okay.
My question is, since you're an artist, have you brought anything back from that other realm of reality that has influenced your artistry and actually opened up other avenues of art for you?
Oh, wow, that's an amazing question. I'll definitely say that when I used to deliver dance workshops, I deliver my workshops in a similar way to the dance workshop format, in terms of, I have a lot of physical exercises that we do related to the out-of-body experience. And one thing I will say about crossing both of these realms, I'm talking about synchronicity. I think I had that 15 years experience of knowing how to be in my body in order to teach people to go out of body, because it's important that we can integrate our experiences back by embodying and integrating them. So I don't think there was a coincidence there. So I definitely have used that and harnessed that experience. I do want to do a video, and it's dance on film, and it's been in the background for a while, and it's a dance theater online depiction of what it feels like to have an out-of-body experience, but done in a very abstract way. So I do want to do that this year, hopefully, fingers crossed, so people can get a visual and maybe a bit of an aesthetic sense of what it feels like if we do a good job.
That's amazing. Have your senses increased in any way, like smell, touch, because you stated that you're tactile in nature? Has that increased in some type of way outside of dance, like just in the 3D realm? I'm curious.
I think there's a lot of people report becoming more sensitive to things, and I definitely have become more sensitive. I've noticed more precognitive dreams and precognitive imagery in the hypnagogic and the hypnopompic, waking up and going back to sleep. So I have noticed I've got a few messages, if you like, through those states that have then had a correlation in waking reality. And I'm also very sensitive to sound, and I think that's got worse. So I always say to Charlie, I say I feel sound, and I did before when I did dance, but I feel even more so now that I really feel sound. I don't just hear it, it resonates in my body. And of course we all do to some extent because it's frequency, right? But that seems to have increased.
Wow.
Fascinating.
It is fascinating. Thank you for answering my question.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for the question. That was a really good one. Right, okay, we're coming towards the end of everything now in terms, so Jade, thank you so much for being an absolute wonderful guest, as I knew you would be. Just to let everybody know that moving forward, our next guest will be Kaz Coronel, who is very similar to Jade, is incredibly creative, And what is interesting, it's the first time we're going to have somebody on the show who's a direct descendant of a famous philosopher, Spinoza. So that's going to be very interesting as well. And again, Kaz is part of our extended group that we're building up together. Also, if anybody is interested, particularly you guys that are listening to this live, is that next Wednesday at 4 o'clock on my other Facebook site, I'll be doing what I'm calling now Consciousness Live Redux, whereby we'll be showing an old show where we will have the person who was involved in our guest actually available online as well to answer questions on Facebook. And it's will be Patricia Arwayon, who is a person that has been researching Egyptology for many, many years, who actually lives and does guided tours in Cairo. So that's going to be a fascinating one as well. But Jade, thank you very much. And always thank you to Dia Nunez over there in Denver, Colorado, who without the H2O network, we wouldn't be able to put this show on. So thanks so much, everybody. Thank you for you guys listening and watching in live on Facebook, and for everybody else who's picking this up. Now, please continue the conversation on my Facebook wall. I'm going to be shooting off now, but just keep the conversation going. I noticed there's an awful lot of ideas and questions flying around there. So please continue with this. This is our thing. You know, it's all of us are involved in this. It's not just Jade, it's not much myself, it's not just Dia, it's not even our guest, it's everybody out there. If we're going to change the paradigm and we're going to change the way humanity takes itself forward, we have to join together. We have to create a worldwide movement. And that's what we're trying to do. So please join us. Okay, thanks everybody. Thanks, and we'll see you all soon. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, bye.